There was a time when one name quietly shaped what millions of American families placed on their dinner tables, yet some of its most trusted recipes have almost vanished without explanation. These were not rare dishes or complicated creations. They were simple, familiar meals printed in cookbooks, clipped from boxes, and passed from one kitchen to another with quiet confidence. For decades, they fed families through ordinary evenings and uncertain times, becoming part of daily life without anyone noticing how deeply they mattered. Then slowly they disappeared. No announcement. No farewell. Just silence. Today, those recipes exist only in fading pages, tucked inside forgotten drawers, or remembered by those who grew up with them. What caused them to fade away, and why did no one fight to keep them? In this video, you will uncover 10 forgotten recipes that once defined American kitchens, and the quiet reasons they were left behind. It began with a dish that once appeared on countless American tables, yet today feels almost unreal to imagine. It was called tomato aspic, a chilled creation made from seasoned tomato juice, carefully set into a firm, shimmering mold. At first glance, it looked elegant, even impressive, especially when served at gatherings where presentation mattered as much as taste. During the early and mid-20th century, this dish carried a quiet sense of sophistication. Home cooks believed it reflected skill and attention, something that could elevate an ordinary meal into something memorable. It often appeared alongside meats or salads, sometimes shaped in decorative molds that turned simple ingredients into something almost ceremonial. Families trusted recipes like this because they represented more than food. They symbolized effort, pride, and a desire to create something beautiful from what was available. In a time before convenience foods took over, dishes like tomato aspic required patience and care, and that effort gave them meaning. But as decades passed, tastes began to change. The idea of a savory gelatin dish slowly lost its appeal. What once felt refined started to feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable to newer generations. Without any clear moment of disappearance, tomato aspic quietly slipped away from everyday life. Now, it remains as a reminder of a different era, when even the simplest ingredients could be transformed into something that felt special, and when presentation carried a kind of importance that modern kitchens rarely remember. There was a time when a dish could sound unusual, even by the standards of its own era, yet still earn a place on the American table. Ham and banana hollandaise was one of those creations. At its core, it combined sliced ham wrapped around soft bananas, finished with a warm layer of rich hollandaise sauce. The contrast of sweet and savory was not considered strange. It was seen as inventive, even modern. This recipe gained attention during a period when home cooking began to experiment with bold pairings. Families were encouraged to try something different, to trust that familiar ingredients could be transformed into something entirely new. Cookbooks promoted these ideas with confidence, presenting them as exciting solutions for everyday meals and special occasions alike. For many households, dishes like this carried a sense of curiosity. Serving something unexpected showed a willingness to embrace change, to move beyond routine meals and explore new flavors. It reflected a time when creativity in the kitchen was celebrated, even if the results were not always universally loved. Over time, however, that sense of novelty began to fade. What once felt adventurous started to feel mismatched. As food culture shifted toward simpler and more natural combinations, the appeal of such contrasts slowly disappeared. Ham and banana hollandaise was not rejected all at once. It simply stopped being made. Today, it stands as a quiet reminder of an era when experimentation defined the kitchen, and when even the most unusual ideas were given a place at the table. There was a time when a salad was expected to do more than refresh. It was meant to impress, to hold its shape, and to carry a sense of perfection onto the table. Perfection salad lived up to that expectation. Made from shredded cabbage, crisp vegetables, and gelatin, it was carefully molded into a firm, glistening form that looked almost too precise to disturb. In the early 20th century, this dish represented control and order in the kitchen. Every ingredient had its place, suspended evenly within a clear structure that reflected patience and discipline. It was often served at gatherings, where presentation spoke as loudly as flavor, and where a well-formed mold signaled skill and attention to detail. Families embraced recipes like this because they aligned with the values of the time. Food was not only nourishment, it was a reflection of effort, pride, and the ability to create something visually striking from simple components. A dish like perfection salad could turn an ordinary meal into something that felt carefully arranged and thoughtfully prepared. As years passed, however, expectations began to shift. The appeal of molded salads slowly faded as preferences moved toward freshness and simplicity. What once symbolized refinement began to feel rigid and outdated. Without any sudden disappearance, perfection salad quietly slipped out of everyday cooking. Now, it remains as a silent trace of a time when even a salad was expected to look perfect, and when the table itself was part of the performance. There was a time when nothing in the kitchen was wasted, and even the most overlooked ingredients were given purpose. Liverloaf was one of those creations, built from a cut of meat that demanded careful preparation and an understanding of flavor. Ground liver was blended with breadcrumbs, onions, and seasoning, then baked into a firm loaf that could be sliced and served like a centerpiece. During periods when resources were limited, dishes like this carried quiet importance. Liver was affordable, widely available, and valued for its strength and nourishment. Families relied on it not because it was popular, but because it was practical. Recipes transformed it into something structured and dependable, turning necessity into a meal that could feed everyone at the table. There was also a sense of discipline behind it. Cooking liver required attention, and presenting it as a loaf made it more approachable, more familiar. It allowed households to serve something substantial while maintaining a sense of order and routine in their meals. Over time, however, preferences began to change. As more choices became available, the demand for stronger flavors declined. Liver, once accepted without question, slowly lost its place in everyday cooking. The effort to reshape it into something appealing was no longer enough. Liverloaf did not disappear overnight. It faded quietly, replaced by foods that required less adjustment and offered more comfort. Now, it stands as a reminder of a time when practicality shaped the menu, and when even the least favored ingredients were given a place at the table. There was a time when convenience and presentation came together in ways that now feel almost forgotten. Jelly chicken salad was one of those dishes, carefully arranged and set into a smooth, glossy mold that held every ingredient in place. Pieces of chicken, vegetables, and seasoning were suspended within a clear gelatin, creating a dish that looked structured, precise, and intentionally crafted. During the mid-20th century, this type of preparation reflected a growing fascination with order in the kitchen. Meals were no longer only about taste. They were about appearance, efficiency, and the ability to prepare something ahead of time without losing its form. A dish like jelly chicken salad could be made in advance, chilled, and presented with confidence at gatherings or family dinners. For many households, it represented control. Every element was fixed, every portion predictable. It allowed home cooks to serve something that felt organized and dependable, even during busy days. The visual clarity of the dish gave it a sense of refinement that matched the expectations of the era. As time moved forward, however, that structured appeal began to lose its hold. People started to prefer meals that felt fresh and less confined. The idea of meat suspended in gelatin slowly became unfamiliar, even unappealing to newer generations. Jelly chicken salad did not vanish with a clear ending. It simply stopped being chosen. Today, it remains as a quiet reminder of a time when control, convenience, and presentation defined what belonged on the table. There was a time when even the simplest dessert was expected to stretch what little was available into something comforting and memorable. Mock apple pie was one of those creations, built not from apples, but from ordinary crackers transformed through careful preparation into a filling that resembled the taste and texture of fruit. During periods when fresh produce was expensive or difficult to obtain, home cooks relied on ingenuity. This recipe used crushed crackers, sugar, lemon, and spices to imitate the flavor of apples. Once baked, It formed a familiar slice that could easily be mistaken for the real thing. For many families, it was not about imitation alone. It was about creating a sense of normalcy when resources were limited. Cookbooks of the time presented it as a clever solution, a way to bring comfort to the table even when ingredients were scarce. Children often grew up without realizing that the dessert they enjoyed did not contain any fruit at all. It became part of everyday life, accepted without question. As availability improved and fresh ingredients became more accessible, the need for substitutions slowly faded. The idea of replacing fruit with processed alternatives lost its appeal. What once represented creativity under constraint began to feel unnecessary in a more abundant era. Mock apple pie did not disappear because it failed. It disappeared because the circumstances that created it no longer existed. Today, it stands as a quiet reminder of how resourcefulness once shaped even the sweetest moments at the table. There was a time when no ingredient was too ordinary to be transformed into something unexpected. Spam upside-down pie emerged from that mindset, a dish that reflected both creativity and the realities of mid-century kitchens. It placed slices of canned meat at the bottom of a baking dish, often layered with vegetables and a batter or pastry that would rise above it during cooking. Canned meat products had become a staple in many households during periods of uncertainty. They were affordable, shelf-stable, and easy to prepare. In that environment, recipes like this were not unusual. They represented a practical approach to feeding families, where convenience and nourishment mattered more than refinement. The upside-down style added a sense of novelty. When the dish was turned over after baking, the arrangement of ingredients created a structured presentation that felt intentional and complete. It was a way of turning simple provisions into something that appeared thoughtful and composed. For a time, this kind of cooking carried a quiet confidence. It reflected trust in packaged foods and a willingness to build entire meals around them. Families accepted these dishes as part of everyday life, especially when options were limited and efficiency was valued. As food culture shifted toward fresher ingredients and lighter preparations, dishes built around processed staples gradually lost their place. Spam upside-down pie faded from regular menus without a clear moment of disappearance. Today, it remains as a reminder of an era when practicality shaped creativity, and when even the most modest ingredients could become the foundation of a full meal. There was a time when breakfast did not arrive from a box or a freezer, but from a slow process that filled the kitchen with patience and warmth. Cornmeal mush breakfast squares were part of that tradition, made by cooking cornmeal with water or milk until it thickened into a dense, porridge-like base. Once cooled, it would be sliced into firm squares and often pan-fried until crisp on the outside. This dish carried a strong connection to earlier generations, especially in households where simplicity and affordability guided every meal. Cornmeal was inexpensive and widely available, making it a reliable foundation for families who needed something filling to start the day. The texture was plain, but the preparation gave it substance, turning a basic ingredient into something structured and sustaining. In many homes, it was served with syrup, butter, or even savory toppings, depending on what was available. It reflected a time when breakfast was less about variety and more about endurance through the day ahead. Every bite carried the quiet practicality of a meal designed to last. As decades passed, breakfast habits began to change. Faster options, sweeter flavors, and ready-made cereals slowly replaced foods that required cooking and patience. The idea of preparing cornmeal from scratch every morning became less common, especially as routines grew busier. Cornmeal mush breakfast squares faded without urgency or notice. It was not rejected, only replaced. Today, it remains a memory of a slower kitchen, where even the first meal of the day was built with care, time, and simplicity. There was a time when even a simple sandwich could carry the warmth of a full meal. Creamed tuna on toast was one of those dependable dishes, built from pantry staples that many households kept within easy reach. Flaked tuna was combined with a creamy white sauce, then poured generously over toasted bread, creating a soft, rich meal that was both filling and familiar. During the mid-20th century, this dish appeared often in American homes. It was quick to prepare, affordable, and adaptable to whatever ingredients were available. For families balancing limited time and resources, it offered comfort without complication. The texture was soft, the flavor mild, and the preparation required little more than basic cooking skills. It was also a reflection of practicality in everyday life. Meals were expected to be efficient, nourishing, and consistent. Creamed tuna on toast fit that expectation perfectly, becoming a quiet staple for lunches and simple dinners. It was not designed to impress. It was designed to sustain. As food culture evolved, preferences began to shift toward fresher ingredients and more defined textures. Cream-based sauces fell out of favor in many kitchens, and canned combinations slowly lost their everyday presence. What once felt reliable began to feel dated. Without a clear moment of disappearance, creamed tuna on toast quietly left the table. It was replaced by faster meals and lighter choices, fading from regular rotation. Today, it remains as a reminder of a time when comfort food was built from simplicity, and when even the most modest ingredients were enough to create something warm and complete. There was a time when dessert did not always mean chocolate, fruit, or cream. Sometimes, it came from the most unexpected combination of ingredients found in a kitchen cupboard. Vinegar pie was one of those quiet inventions, created during periods when fresh fruit was scarce and households had to rely on what was already available. At its core, the recipe used vinegar, sugar, butter, and eggs to create a filling that mimicked the brightness of fruit-based pies. The acidity of vinegar gave it a sharpness that balanced the sweetness, producing a flavor that felt surprising but familiar once baked. To many families, it was less about imitation and more about making something comforting out of limited options. This pie was especially common in times of economic difficulty, when traditional ingredients were not always within reach. Home cooks learned to adapt, using chemistry rather than abundance to achieve flavor. The result was a dessert that felt complete, even when nothing in it came from an orchard. As years passed and access to fresh ingredients improved, vinegar pie gradually disappeared from everyday cooking. The idea of vinegar as a dessert base became unfamiliar, even forgotten by most households. What once represented ingenuity began to feel unnecessary in a world of abundance. It did not vanish in a dramatic way. It simply stopped being passed down. Today, vinegar pie stands as a reminder of how creativity once defined survival in the kitchen, and how even the simplest pantry staples once carried the power to create something unexpectedly memorable. These recipes did not disappear because they lacked value. They faded because the world around them changed. Kitchens became faster, ingredients became more accessible, and traditions slowly lost their place in daily life. What once carried families through ordinary evenings now survives only in memory, written pages, and forgotten cookbooks. Yet each of these dishes tells a quiet story of adaptation, patience, and survival. They reflect a time when cooking was not about convenience, but about making do with what was available and turning it into something meaningful. If you have ever seen any of these recipes in your own family history, share it in the comments. These memories deserve to be remembered before they disappear completely. And for more forgotten stories from America's past, make sure to subscribe and stay with us.